Welcome in, everybody. We're diving into a topic today that's sparking some serious debate. Can we really have a level playing field in college sports while making sure every athlete feels welcome and respected?
And it's a debate that goes way beyond wins and losses.
Right. You guys have been asking for a deep dive on transgender women in the NCAA, especially with these Georgia University officials calling for a total ban on them competing in women's sports.
Yeah, we're really wrestling with some big questions here. What does fairness really mean? What does inclusion look like in action? And how do we approach these complicated questions around gender identity in a world as public and competitive as college athletics?
Exactly. And just so everyone's on the same page, when we say cisgender athletes, we're simply talking about folks whose gender identity matches the sex they were assigned at birth. Now, these Georgia officials are essentially saying, hang on a second, are we potentially undermining all the progress cisgender women athletes have fought so hard for in the name of inclusion?
Right, and their main point is this. Even though hormone therapy is super important for gender transition, it might not totally eliminate every physical difference. They keep bringing up bone density.
Interesting.
So even after transitioning, some transgender women might still have greater bone density compared to cisgender women.
And how would that actually affect things on the court or on the field? Give me an example.
Okay, so picture this. Basketball court. Two players. Equally skilled. One transgender woman, one cisgender woman, both going for a rebound. Now that difference in bone density, even if it's slight, could give the transgender woman a bit of an advantage when it comes to jumping height, or even just how their body handles the impact of landing.
It's about those small but potentially significant physical edges.
Exactly. And it's not just bone density either. Georgia officials are also concerned about things like muscle mass and endurance. They're suggesting that even after hormone therapy, these physical traits might not fully regress to what's considered the average range for cisgender women.
So their focus is on making sure there's fairness for cisgender women athletes.
Right.
But obviously, there's another very important side to this, the importance of inclusion for all athletes.
Absolutely. And that's where things get really, really tricky. LGBTQ plus advocates are pushing back hard, saying, hey, you can't just focus on physical traits. You're totally overlooking the lived experiences of transgender women. They argue that telling transgender women they can't compete based on their gender identity sends a really damaging message, like they don't belong.
Which is a heavy message in any context, but especially in college sports, right? I mean, that's often seen as the space where you're supposed to find your place, grow as a person, be part of a team.
For sure.
So how's that message landing with the athletes themselves, the ones who are living this debate every day?
It feels like we're talking about two different ideas of fairness here.
Yeah.
Like on one hand, you want a level playing field where everyone's got a fair shot based on their physical abilities.
Right.
But then there's this other side, the fairness of letting everyone compete as their true selves, no matter what. It's a real clash of values, no doubt.
Yeah.
And for some cisgender women athletes, it's creating a lot of anxiety. It's like this fear that they've poured their heart and soul into their sport, worked their whole lives to get to this level. And suddenly, the rules might change in a way that puts them at a disadvantage.
Especially with scholarships on the line and all the pressure to compete at such an elite level, those opportunities are huge.
Absolutely. And it's not even just about winning, really. It's about that sense of validation, the recognition you get for all that hard work.
Right.
Imagine feeling like you have to not only outperform your competition, but also somehow overcome this perceived biological difference just to stay in the game.
Wow, yeah. That's a lot to process, both physically and emotionally. But then you have transgender athletes on the other side who simply want a chance to play, to be part of a team like anyone else.
Yeah. And for many of them, it's about something much deeper than just competing. It's
Yeah.
about being seen for who they truly are, having their identity affirmed and celebrated. Imagine being told that you can't play the sport you love, the sport that makes you feel whole, just because of who you are, like your very identity is somehow a threat to fairness itself.
Honestly, it just feels like a lose-lose situation for everyone, you know? Like we're stuck trying to choose between supporting one group or the other when what we really need is to find a way to honor both fairness and inclusion at the same time. So where do we even go from here? How do we start untangling this mess?
Well, it's definitely not going to be easy. There's no quick fix for this kind of thing.
Right.
But I do think a good first step is more research. We need to move past just opinions and assumptions and get a clearer picture of what the science actually says. How big are these physical differences really, and do they actually lead to a real competitive advantage in specific sports? These are questions we need answers to.
So, like getting some hard data to work with instead of just speculating and playing out what-if scenarios?
Exactly, because we're talking about real people's lives here, their
Yeah.
opportunities, their dreams, and that deserves a much closer look than just guesswork. We need solid scientific studies to really figure out which physical changes are truly irreversible and if those changes actually translate to an unfair advantage in certain sports.
Okay, so science can maybe help us understand the playing field a bit better, but what about the rules of the game itself? What should the NCAA be doing in the middle of all this?
Well, they've got a big role to play for sure. Actually, those Georgia University officials we talked about earlier, they suggested that the NCAA put together a special task force
Interesting.
made up of scientists, athletes, medical professionals, and of course, transgender advocates.
Okay, so a real mix of voices and perspectives on the issue.
Right. The idea is to bring in this diverse group of experts to really dig into the research, listen to the concerns from athletes on all sides, and ultimately come up with some guidelines for transgender athletes that are both fair and inclusive. And just as important, these policies need to be flexible enough to adapt as our understanding of this issue evolves.
Because what we think we know today might be completely different 5, 10 years down the road.
Exactly.
But even beyond policy, even beyond the science, it feels like there's something even more fundamental that needs to happen here. And that's real dialogue, don't you think?
100%. We've got to create opportunities for everyone to come to the table. Cisgender athletes, transgender athletes, coaches, medical professionals, and have open and honest conversations. Let's really listen to each other, try to understand where everyone's coming from, and see if we can find some common ground.
Because at the end of the day, whether they're cisgender or transgender, all these athletes share a love for their sport, a desire to compete. And maybe, just maybe, that shared passion can be the bridge that helps us figure out a way forward here.
It's a bridge worth building. Because this isn't just about transgender athletes. It's about the whole future of sports. It's about making sure that athletics remains a place where everyone, no matter who they are, feels welcome and supported to compete at their best while upholding those core values of fairness and sportsmanship.
Well said. And that's a future I think we can all get behind. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Big thanks to our expert for breaking down this complex issue. And to all of you listening, keep thinking about these big questions. How do we make sure athletics stays a space where everyone feels empowered and supported, regardless of their gender identity, while still grappling with these really complex questions of fairness and inclusion?